going on, guys? It's Phil with Mastercrafted, and I'm here to bring you another video on just how important it is and the skills that you need to develop a game plan before you even set foot on the table. We've talked about tournament prep, we've talked about game prep, we've done layouts, we've done WTC layouts, we've done mission reviews, we've talked about teams, we've talked about all those things. And I want to streamline this for y'all to help you understand the things that you need to do to develop a good game plan. Now, unfortunately, I cannot go through every mission combination and layout and say this should be your game plan for your army, your list, your detachment going forward. But what I will say is there's some framework of what the game plan could possibly be as you are walking up to the table and you see the list that your opponent has and the things that you're capable of, because that is what matters most, right? You're going to be able to identify those things as a player, and I want to give you like the tools and things that will help you understand how you develop a game plan as you're prepared. Now, I would say the first thing you need to do before the tournament starts, you're looking at the player pack and you're looking at the missions and the terrain. You should have a couple game plans in your pocket of like, okay, if this is, the game plan I want to execute, I know how I'm going to execute it. And I take that framework and I build it into each matchup. So I'm going to give you an example of two different armies that are going to have two different game plans into the same layout, same mission. They're different armies, but you just need to understand that the framework is there. So let's take Death Guard on Search and Destroy Linchpin. So that is your normal control your home and control the objectives that are out in the middle. Search and Destroy is an interesting one for Death Guard because it means we're a lot more boxed in than we normally are, but we do have accessible access to the middle objective. Search and Destroy as a whole is a tough mission for Death Guard because we aren't as mobile as some armies are, and they can really take advantage of us. So overall, right off the bat, for Death Guard, Search and Destroy, and Linchpin, it's a primary scoring game. And right off the bat, I'm thinking, man, this is a little tough because I'm not as mobile as all the other armies. Their natural objective is relatively far away, and on the majority of layouts, it's relatively well protected, especially on Search and Destroy, and you're going to have a very hard time actually getting to it without reasonable assets. Is Search and Destroy for Death Guard, depending on who you're going into, a primary denial game? Can Death Guard do that? Yes, they can, if you build properly. So let's say you're running a bunch of 5-man Plague Marines, like 6 of them. And all you're doing is throwing out the 5-man Plague Marines in your Rhinos, getting them on objectives, flipping them, and denying primaries there. That's a great mission for that type of list, and it does really well because of the fact that you built towards primary denial, and the Rhinos cover up an issue that Death Guard has in terms of mobility. You see this layout, you have a bunch of Rhinos with Plague Marines inside it. Great, you have the primary denial strategy because you've built your list that way. But that's not what everyone can do, and that's not how everyone builds their Death Guard. So let's say you build your Death Guard like Taliban, or let's say it's just like virulent vehicle spam with a bunch of drones and blight haulers and stuff like that. Well, is that a primary denial list? It can be, but it's not good into every single matchup on this layout on this mission. Primary denial into like Tau would be a lot more difficult, or Imperial Guard would be a lot more difficult with those types of lists because they're going to auto see you, and it's very hard to put enough assets out without risking those assets to flip objectives. So now we're in more of a stalemate game, looking to maybe find a way to get onto our opponent's home to deny primaries and Linchpin that way, because if they're not controlling their home, all their objectives are worth less. Is that incredibly difficult? And to Tau and Eshmael Tarm that have the board presence to like spread out over a board and deal with those things? Yes. So it's not an effective game plan to a good player. So you can't take a list and be like, okay, my job is primary denial, and I will do that until I lose. Well, that's the problem. You're going to run into a matchup where you just lose because you have not been willing to adapt your game plan based on the mission, the layout, and your opponent. So what other options does Death Guard have? If we talk about primary denial as a main form of game plan. Not to say that you can't have primary denial as an option as you're developing another game plan, but it can't be the main source, right? Because for some armies, it is the main source. Like my Gene Stealer cult, right? That's a primary denial list, and I will continue to do that. I will just find different ways to do that. And then there's some armies that it cannot do that into, but it does it kind of the best. Even in the tough matchups where it is a little bit more difficult, the tools of that army carry you across the finish line. Death Guard doesn't have those tools in terms of high OC units that can go flip objectives and trade repeatedly. So you have to be able to adapt. The next thing would be a trade control game plan. So for example, like you're only putting out certain units because you know your opponent's going to need more to actually kill them. So for example, Death Guard in Virulent has one of the best strats, which is the -1 damage strat, especially on Plague Marines, T6. They become incredibly tough when you make them -1 damage, and they can become an incredible problem for a lot of armies. Stuff like drones with auto blow up, right? Like that's a problem as well. And we can put units out there and say, okay, you want to come trade with me? Well, I have this Overwatch threat. I have this auto explode threat. I have this unit that's going to be -1 damage. It's going to be more resilient than you want it to be. You're going to have to put more assets out if you plan to kill it. Or it's sticky. So like I sticky an objective early, and now because I've moved further and further away, like it's harder to engage and trade with me. So the trade game in general is just an overarching game plan. Like how do you trade properly? And we have a video on that. Lane knocked one out with myself and Cody Jiru, who's a fantastic Drakari player. But if we talk about trading, like as a game plan, every army is going to do that differently. So, for example, my Death Watch trades by giving you one squad of Death Watch Terminators and saying, okay, I have this extremely durable unit. It's a 2-up, 4-up. A bunch of them have 3 wounds. A couple of them have 4 wounds because they have Thunderhammer Storm Shield. Can you kill this unit? Do you want to kill this unit? Do you want to expose anything to kill these Terminators? A lot of people say, yeah, I want to kill those Terminators. I hear Terminators. I want them to die. For me, they're a trade piece because I want you to put out enough assets to actually deal with those Terminators. That way, when my Dominus breaks down, they have something really valuable to shoot into. Death Guard trades by putting sticky on objectives or putting Poxwalkers out and saying, okay, whatever you expose, is it going to be 1, strong enough to wipe the full unit? 2, are you also taking care of the objective? Because if you wipe the Poxwalkers and you don't flip the objective, it doesn't really matter. Like I will trade those Poxwalkers to have a sticky objective on the middle of the board that I score primary on the following turn. And that is how like Death Guard develops that game plan, because they're forced trades in different ways. Blood Angels, right? How do they force trades? Well, they force trades by applying pressure. EC, same way. World Eaters, same way. They're applying trades through pressure. Blood Angels do it with like 10-man a Death Company or a bunch of 5-man JPIs or Vanguard vets. And they're just saying, hey, I'm super effective with these 5-mans. I can go into almost anything and either take a big chunk out of it or kill it outright. And we're going to force that issue over and over again because we are hyper lethal. And then we have like follow-on actions that we're going to be trying to do after that. So building that pressure through those effective combat armies is really good as well. But that's their game plan, right? Like I feel like we're going down a rabbit hole here of all the game plans that you could possibly have. But the end all be all of it is you need to have a good understanding of what your game plan is. So we'll reel it back in a little bit. We've already talked about primary denial game plan. We've already talked about the trading game plan. I hinted at it a little bit, but then there's the pressure game plan. Now, there is pressure in primary denial, completely doable. There's also pressure in just asset removal. Like, I don't care if I have a low primary score. I'm going to look to deny and remove assets from the board, so when we get to turn 5, you don't have any assets left to score. Now, 2 different ways to do that, and I think both are going to be really impactful. And it's actually, without going into every layout and every mission and all those things, it does boil often down to, are you going first or second? So going first, pressure, you have to be able to apply it somewhere, whether it be with like a lethal combat army like World Eaters or EC or Blood Angels or Black Templar, or it's a scoring army like GSC or Ashmal Tarm or Necrons, where it's like, okay, I'm going to go on all these objectives, and I'm going to apply pressure this way, not necessarily by killing you, by forcing you to deal with multiple things that are on the board all at the same time. I've stickied all 3 objectives, and I've terraformed all 3 of them. That's how I apply pressure. I'm not necessarily applying pressure by killing you, but I am applying pressure by saying, hey, if you do nothing about this, I'm going to max primaries for at least 1 more turn, which some armies can't handle. And then going first, when we talk about applying pressure, that's really important. Like, going first, we have to find ways to apply pressure, because we cannot get to turn 5 and be relatively close with our opponent. We have to find ways to distance ourselves. And unfortunately, like, that is definitely army dependent. That is definitely list dependent. That is definitely like layout dependent and mission dependent, because like I already said it already, but GSC on Terraform, if I go first, I'm sticking all 3 objectives in the middle. I'm terraforming every single one of those objectives, and then I'm going first. So now I'm just gonna like either reactive with one of the bikes that was out there, or I have 1 pure strain that's actually on the objectives, the other behind the wall, so when you kill them, like, you can't interact with the rest of them, and so on and so forth. But that's 1 mission, and that's 1 very, very unique army, because not every army can trade like GSC, because I can just bring the models back. Nope, there's not an army that can do that like GSC can, which makes them fun to play. But how you apply pressure. So let's say it's Blood Angels. Well, if I'm going first and I need to apply pressure and I'm a pressure army, maybe I'm going and tying things up. I'm not intrinsically scoring points off that. There is no value. There's no coherent value to me doing that action that actually relates to points. The benefit is what happens turns 2, turns 3, turns 4, where I've either picked up so many of my opponent's scoring pieces where they can no longer interact in the game in the way that they want to by like doing actions or scoring secondaries or whatever the case is. Like, they've lost the capabilities to do that, and now they have to play my game as the Blood Angels player of being like, well, you have to remove my assets now, because otherwise I'm just going to keep running through you, and you can't chase down like 2 or 3 point secondaries and let me like punch you in the mouth. Because if you walk up and you cleanse on an objective, great, you did that. Now I've picked up another asset, and hopefully the pressure that you build in the beginning of the game by removing assets with armies like EC, Blood Angels, World Leaders, stuff like that, that when we get to the late game, even though maybe I don't have as many scoring pieces as those players, as World Leaders, as Blood Angels, whatever the case is, like, okay, I don't have as many scoring pieces as you, Ash Meltarum or GSC or Necrons or whatever the case is, but you don't have those pieces either now, and I'm a lot more lethal than you because I have built my list to be lethal. And there's some armies we can do that into, and there's some armies that we can't. So let's say Blood Angels into Imperial Knights or Chaos Knights. That is a lot harder to be lethal into. And I would say the majority of players, like the Blood Angels players, would agree with me. If you took an infantry-heavy list, like, yes, with Lance and Lethal, you can punch up into a lot of those big knights, which is good. Because other than that, like, you're going to have a really tough time dealing with those units. So you have to find ways around it, right? Like, maybe my Death Company brick isn't as important, and I charged it into a big knight because I just need to tie it down. I need to tie it down. Lamardes with the -1 damage, he holds one of the double Gata spoilers down and just tries to keep the rest of your army alive, even though this huge brick that is super valuable to you is not necessarily being used how it previously was used. The pressure that you build off it allows you to be successful. Okay, so those are 3 game plans that I think you as a player need to put in your head to understand what it is your army is actually capable of. There's a lot of combinations between those that we could use to be effective, right? You can have a pressure game plan that has primary denial. You can have a primary denial game plan that has a trading part of it, which it should, right? Like, that's how we build the game. But you need to identify what the main facet of the game plan is, and we have to be willing to adapt off those things. So, like, your opponent long bomb charges you 3 times where they make, a bunch of 10 or 11 inch charges, and they've picked up all your screens. And now you're like, well, my original game plan was a primary denial game plan because I could get these assets out on my opponent's objective. But now they've like charged me on every unit that I needed to do those things. Well, now we have to change our game plan and we have to find another solution. We cannot just stick to the same thing and expect it to work or fall into our opponent's game plan if that's not what works for us. So yeah, those 3 overall, definitely super important. definitely something you need to put in the back of your head of like, what is my actual game plan here? And unfortunately, I can't sit down with each and every one of you that are watching this video to help you with your army into that mission, into that opponent, and that terrain. We have a wealth of information on this channel, and there's plenty of information all across YouTube that will help you. You need to identify what layout suits you best. You need to identify like where you're going to station units on certain layouts to do certain things. And then, okay, I'm going to station behind this L, and I know this is the unit I want to use for primary denial on turn 2. Great. That's exactly what I want to hear if we talk about developing a game plan. But then when I say, well, your opponent didn't put anything out there, or they stickied that objective and they ran away, so now you have no charge target and you don't have enough movement to get on this objective, what's your game plan? Did you realize that before? Or is this something when you watched your opponent make the decision, you're like, that's going to be a problem? And that's okay, because that's all about learning 40k. Like, you need to see those things and be like, okay, next time maybe my unit needs to be closer. Next time, maybe when I list build, I change this unit to, instead of just regular intercessors or assault intercessors, now they're Vanguard vets, or now they're, JPI, whatever the case is, because I know that unit in that location will have enough movement to get on this objective to flip it, even if my opponent stickies it and runs away. So each one of those things are different, and you need to understand how you get after them over the course of a game. Yeah. I could talk about this for days, game plans as a whole, and hopefully just me verbalizing it has helped you as a player understand what it takes to develop a game plan. If you think that your game plan falls outside of one of those 3, leave a comment. I'd love to discuss it with you in terms of like how you develop your game plan and stuff like that. And if you have any other questions, or you want some more clarifying information, hit me up in the Discord, hit Lane up in the Discord. We love talking about 40k. So yeah, just let us know. And don't forget, the victory isn't given, it's forged. And it's forged right here on Mastercrafted. I'll talk to you later, guys.